we'll begin. I call the meeting of the Stockbridge Planning Board on January 5th, 2021 to order. You all have the agenda. The first item is approving the minutes of the last meeting, which was on December 15th, which were distributed. Are there any questions or comments about those minutes, please?
I have one suggested change for the paragraph addressing 14 Pine Street.
Yes?
I think we discussed some of the issues, screening and so on, and you had indicated, Bill, that you wanted to be in touch with Ned to address this as a start. But I
Right.
don't think you had actually, Ned wasn't on the call at that point. So the last sentence in that paragraph.
Actually, I think he was on the call, Kate.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
don't,
he got on.
yeah.
He was
I
on
did not-
later on, but he wasn't on at that point.
Well, he was on at a point where I didn't feel I needed to call him because he said he would look into it. I never called him separately, which I would have done had he not listened in to the discussion.
But it says second to last sentence says, Bill asked Ned to look at the site and determine if there are violations. Ned agreed to look into the plans in the site now.
Well, is the problem the word now?
It sounds to me like it's a discussion that took place after the meeting, and the minutes are supposed to reflect the actual discussion at the meeting.
My memory is that Ned was at the meeting, listened to our discussion. I asked him to look into it while he was in the meeting, and he said he would. I did not call him later or the next day. He said he'd look into it at the meeting, and he has, as you've seen.
Okay, I'll leave it at that. I'll probably abstain on these minutes just because when I checked it, at least for that part of it, it seemed different.
Okay, any other comments? Hearing none, let's, I ask Jennifer to call the roll to approve the minutes, please. Or actually, I should ask for a
We
motion.
accept the minutes
Thank you.
as
And-
presented.
Is there a second?
And I was muted and I couldn't make my comment. It's also on the minutes and it's in the second page and talks about when we're hiring the consultant. And it explained it was a motion to engage these consultants and get the select board to support our plan to engage these consultants. And then there was some dialogue back and forth. And I thought it was important that, because Kate asked me about this, so the minutes should be amended to say that Christine addressed her long association with Jeff Lacey going back to the 1990s when he was working on the first draft of the Growing Smart legislation and his work on issues with the Quabbin Reservoir. She expressed confidence in his ability to work with Stockbridge based on his successful work with other communities in Western Mass. And then we go back to a back and forth discussion.
Did you actually say that, Christine?
I believe I did, because I remember Kate asked me about my, if I knew Jeff Lacey.
Yeah.
And how, and that's when I went into how I knew him.
Okay. Jennifer, I doubt you got that language, or did you?
I got some of it, not all of it, but
It's fairly lengthy. Do we want to defer approving these minutes until you've amended them? And
I withdraw my motion.
we'll take them up at the next meeting.
I guess then I'd like to ask that you also consider my suggested change as well.
I can't. I know what I did, Kate. I talked to Ned on the screen during the meeting. I never called him separately.
Well, how about this? How about if How about if I check the tape and get back to you on it?
You can do what you'd like. I'm not going to amend the minutes on that point. I very clearly remember talking to him while his face was on the screen and he agreed to do the investigation.
Okay, that's fine. I just want to check it. Maybe that was a conversation that had happened later.
And frankly, Kate, what difference does it make? I mean, this is such a quibble. This is not a big deal.
I think that the minutes should reflect the discussion, and I don't think it is a quibble.
I'm sorry, the minutes do not record every word spoken by every member, and they never will, and they shouldn't,
But they should be accurate.
and they are. Okay, so we'll withdraw, Maria's withdrawn her motion. Jennifer, can you consult with Christine and get the language she wants inserted?
Yes.
Please? And we'll address these next meeting.
Bill, could I just make a suggestion?
Yeah,
Could Christine just get it down to a couple of sentences?
yeah, I think you can just summarize that he's highly qualified
And that she's worked with him
and that you've worked
previously?
with him before. I don't think you
If
need to,
that- And if that's acceptable, that's fine. I just wanted there to be some background on the fact that he was somebody that we knew from a professional relationship. So I accept Gary's suggestion and would
Okay.
move forward with the minutes.
right, and I think the meaning there would be clear. in
Thank
that
you,
case.
Gary.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to do the Form A.
You need a motion to adopt the minutes.
No, we're not going to adopt them.
No.
We're going to change them and
Yeah.
address them next meeting.
Yeah.
Okay, Form A, 3 Old Tree Farm Road. I see Alexander Thorpe in the corner. Are you going to talk to this, sir?
I will gladly. Can you hear me all right?
We can, or I can.
Great.
Yep.
And I'm also prepared to share my screen
Please do.
if desired. Okay.
This is another case, by the way, of, I don't know about anybody else, but when I tried to print your schematic, I get the upper left-hand corner only. There was no way I could get anything more than that. It was pointless to try to, I don't know why. I can see it on the screen, but when I try to print it, I only get about an eighth of it and don't even get the full property in question. We've got to
It
find.
may be that within your printer, you need to enable scaling.
Yeah, within the printer?
Well, I don't know
That-
if you're trying to print from Adobe Reader or something like that, but usually when you get to the printer dialog box, there's an option to either print with no scaling or to allow it to fit to page or something like that.
Okay,
So,
well, I'll try that next time.
yeah.
Anyway, please go ahead.
Okay. So
Bigger? Can you make that bigger for us?
I can. I wanted to give an overview, I guess, to begin with.
That's good.
I'll start there, and then I'll zoom into particular portions of the sheet as I get to it. But for the record, I'm Al Thorpe, and I'm at Accord Engineering in Great Barrington. I'm registered as a land surveyor and as a civil engineer, and I'm presenting to you with regard to property owned by Nancy Minkler, trustee of a Nancy Minkler Trust. And the subject property is composed of, on this plan, shown as 2 parts, lots 1 and 2. Right now, it's not divided, but the proposal shown on this plan is to divide it into 2 parts. Lots 1 and 2, or the subject property, lie entirely within the R2 residential district, and the requirements for a building lot in the R2 district include that they must contain at least 2 acres, and the minimum width and frontage must be at least 250 feet. You'll see here on note number 7 on the plan, I've made explicit the contents of each of lots 1 and 2, Lot 1 contains 4.053 acres and has 350.51 feet of frontage along Old Tree Farm Road. Lot 2 contains 3.26 acres and has a total of 276.08 feet of frontage, which is divided mostly along Old Tree Farm Road, has 255 feet of frontage, but also has 21.08 feet of frontage along Route 183 or Interlaken Road.
Oh,
So
it's over here.
I bypassed a discussion of where we are in general. I don't know if anybody has questions of where Old Tree Farm Road is, but Stockbridge Bowl is to the east side of Route 183 over here. And but the proposed division, I believe, can be endorsed by the planning board as approval not required, because each of the lots contain the necessary frontage and area to meet the zoning bylaws. And that frontage is along public ways already in existence. So I believe this does not constitute a subdivision, in that it's appropriate for the planning board to endorse it as approval not required.
Anything else, Al?
I think that's all I've got. I'm happy to answer any questions that folks might have.
Okay, are there any questions from members of the board?
So the Minkler's driveway will that be moved, or will it continue on through that little parcel that's now cut out in the front? Frontage.
The existing driveway will remain where it is. And so there would be an easement created to allow the owner of Lot 1 to continue to use the driveway, which crosses the portion of Lot 2.
Will that be a shared driveway?
At this point, the Minklers are considering first of all, whether to develop Lot 2, and if so, how to develop it. Whether the driveway would be shared, whether it would come from other locations. So at this point, that decision has not been made.
So can you explain now why is there that little piece through which the driveway will go by easement? Why is that part of Lot 2?
The front
So Lot 2, in order to be a building lot, has to contain at least 250 feet of frontage.
I see.
And
That's how the frontage is achieved. I get it. Okay,
yeah, that's right.
I get it. Okay. So we don't know about another driveway. That may or may not come to pass. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I at this point, there's no building permit that's been filed, and the provision for access to Lot 2 could be separate. I don't know if you can see my cursor as it moves along here. Can you? Maybe not.
No, for some reason
Yeah.
I can't. Oh, yes, I don't see it moving.
Oh, okay. Well, maybe it's not visible. The future access could come from Tree Farm Road. It could travel exclusively on Lot 2 and could be completely separate from Lot 1. It could access could be combined, I suppose, subject to whatever provisions in Stockbridge zoning bylaws may apply to shared driveway situations, and I haven't evaluated that. Or it could come from Route 183 to the east, or it could come across adjacent properties. So at this point, it's not known how that access would be achieved.
Okay. Are there any other questions or comments from the board? Are there any abutters who would like to say something at this point? seems like there are not. Okay, if there are no questions, comments, and no further input from Al, shall we proceed to a vote?
I move that we grant this. Do we have to have a motion?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I think we do.
I move we
Yes.
grant this Form A for the Minkler property.
Is there a second?
Second.
Moved by Marie, seconded by Gary. Any further discussion before we vote? Okay, Jennifer, would you please call the roll?
Sure. Nancy,
Aye.
Wayne,
Aye.
Gary,
Aye.
Marie,
Aye.
Bill,
Aye.
Kate,
Aye.
Christine.
I,
That's it.
Okay. Thank you, Al.
Thank you very much. Have
You're
a nice
welcome.
evening.
You too. Okay. The agenda reads, the next point is Bill Arnold's discussion of the revised or amended bylaws, which we will get to. But we wanted to change the order just slightly and introduce Jeff Lacy. And I was supposed to call him or send him a text, which I have just done. He is standing by. So hopefully he knew we were going to start about quarter of, about quarter of. And so I think he will tune in momentarily.
Bill, can we ask Jennifer when she wants us to sign the Form A?
Good question, Jennifer.
I'm there all day on Friday. Thursday, I'm there in the morning from 9 to 11. Terry, the town clerk, is not there this week. I'm not sure when she's going to come in. She's staying away because of some COVID contact. So Thursday or
morning
Friday?
Friday?
Yeah, all day Friday,
Okay,
or Thursday morning.
okay.
Good. I'm glad you cleared that up. Thanks, Gary. I'm looking for,
want me to start introducing Jeff?
yeah, why don't you? And he, hopefully in the middle of it, he will hook up to this Zoom call. Please go ahead, Christine.
I wanted to give a little background for people who may not be familiar with what the planning board has done to get to this point. And so that is what I've included in this introduction. According to the Berkshire Regional Planning Agency, we have 182 parcels of land that are over 10 acres or more, and 21 of those parcels are over 60 acres. If even half of those parcels are developed using our subdivision bylaws, which allow development by right, our town will change. And while change is not bad, it can be if it's not done right. That means it requires us as planners to think about how to ensure it's done in a way that protects open spaces, vistas, wildlife habitat, stone walls, old cart paths, and all the other features we care about. And it allows us to continue to try to continue the look and feel of Stockbridge, memorable and special, instead of seeing our open spaces turned into what could be anywhere USA. While we still have our 2 and 4 acre zoning that was considered cutting edge when it was adopted, recent mass court cases are approving by right proposals for plans that are in compliance with reasonable town bylaws. This is causing planning board members in towns throughout the Commonwealth to be concerned about the future look of their towns. Honoring the work of the people who sat in our seats before us, the planning board began exploring how to address the concerns and looking at cutting-edge bylaws again that could prioritize the wishes of the citizens instead of those that are fostered on us by decisions made in Boston. The Zoning Review Committee started this process, and following the hearing on the redevelopment of the DeSisto School and the diagnostic report by Joel Russell, a decision was made to explore the concept that Randall Arendt and Jeff Lacey worked on and developed in the late 80s and early 90s. It's called open space design zoning, among other things. During the last year, Joel Russell brought to the town an understanding of how OSRD can be used by providing us with draft bylaws and lots of discussion. That information provided momentum to our town leaders, and town meeting voters approved funding to continue the work on developing these bylaws. Having worked with these conservation bylaws that Mass Audubon is one of the leaders in promoting, I have seen what an important tool they are because they are density neutral. And so I think as a town, we can be thrilled to have Jeff Lacey working with Randall Arendt, both of whom have experience in getting dirt under their fingernails. And they will be picking up Joel's work and help us through the next phase of this project with a goal of bringing a bylaw to town meeting for the residents to decide if conservation zoning will work to benefit Stockbridge. Jeff has an impressive resume. For 32 years, he was a land use consultant working on planning and zoning using the concepts of open space design and an offshoot known as natural resource conservation zoning that he developed. He also spent almost 25 years as the chief environmental planner at the Massachusetts Department of Conservation Recreation in the Division of Water Supply Protection. And I think with our concerns about the bowl, we are going to be pleased with Jeff's experience in the management of the Watershed Protection Act within the Quabbin and Ware watersheds, and his ability to provide direct technical assistance to watershed communities. So I look forward to hearing what Jeff has to tell us about his work and how we can move forward on this very important piece of a bylaw for the town of Stockbridge. And he hasn't come on yet?
He has.
Yeah.
He's here. Welcome, Jeff. You're muted.
Boom.
There you go. Everybody see Jeff?
Yes.
Yes.
Good. We're glad you joined us. And you missed about half of Christine's introduction. She'll repeat it for you separately if you'd like.
I couldn't need it.
I don't think you need it, but we're glad to have you. One thing that I thought of this afternoon, Christine, is we had a conversation with Jeff yesterday, I guess. And we have finalized the contract, this working group of Christine, me, and Nancy with Jeff. And I asked you in a separate email, Christine, which you may not have seen, it came out late, if you could share the contract with the rest of the planning board. It's pretty plain vanilla. We used a template that we adjusted slightly to reflect our particular situation. It's quite straightforward, but in the interest of transparency, you all should see the contract. And Jeff is ready, willing, and able to get to work on this. I think it's important to emphasize one of the points that Christine made, and that is, starting with the engagement of Joel by the zoning review committee and all the processes that have led up to this point. Our aim has been to produce a bylaw that we think the town can live with and that is usable within the proper limits by developers, by whether it's a single property owner or somebody who wants to do something with a larger piece of land. And to do so, produce such a bylaw for town meeting this year, which presumably will be sometime in May, maybe, what is it, the third Monday in May, I think, and then Tuesday are the elections. I think that's the date, maybe the 16th of May. That does not give us a lot of time. And one of the things that Jeff, who knows Joel very well, has emphasized is, let's use what we can from Joel's work, enhance it or adjust it as may be necessary in various parts, not a wholesale rewrite, but a starting point, to produce something that we can look at pretty quickly. And then I think there's a process of a kind of a continuation of what we did with Randall Arendt in that Zoom meeting a couple of months ago, which I think was highly successful in introducing open space residential design. I think we've got more work to do to bring the community, all the town residents, up to speed with respect to how this new bylaw would differ from the old one and how, in practical terms, it would be put into effect, maybe using some examples, as Randall did in his presentation. I think we need to do that at least once, maybe twice, before we as a board, take those public sessions into account, come up with something that we're all comfortable, or at least a majority of us are comfortable with, so that it can be presented as a warrant at the town meeting in May. That's the plan. I don't think it's too ambitious. I think we've got in Jeff and Randall and the earlier work done by Joel, we've got a basis for moving forward fairly quickly, I think. I don't mean to put you on the hot spot, Jeff, but and we talked about this, so Jeff is aware of our timeline, and I think it's achievable, and I think we're going to end up with something that we're going to be comfortable with. Jeff, would you like to say anything as an introductory remarks to having been introduced by Christine?
Sure. First of all, the two colleagues that you also have working on the project, Joel and Randall, are two of my oldest colleagues. I worked for Randall back in 1987. I was his employee and he was my mentor back then. And then I met Joel Russell in 91, I think, 91 or 92. And I worked with both of them for many, many years, and they're good friends of mine. I worked with Randall on the OSRD model earlier on, and then Joel and Bob Ritchie and I kind of created the natural resource protection zoning model some years later. So we three are very familiar with each other and working together. And I think given the amount of funding that's still left for this project and the short timeline, I am hoping that what Joel did, much of what Joel did is useful and can be tweaked to the point of being acceptable. Yesterday morning when I was on the phone with Joel before I talked with you folks, I was describing the approach I'd like to take, and he said, well, that's what I did. So that sounds good. We're going to have to take a look at that, see exactly what he did, and make sure it still works for everyone. But that's a good head start. So I'm encouraged by that.
Good. Just as an administrative matter, Mike Canales, the town administrator, has the contract. We don't expect any issues coming back from Mike. So Jeff is, the contract will be signed this week, maybe as early as tomorrow. And Jeff will get to work. He's actually already been to work on our behalf in an hour-long call yesterday, where we kind of got our thoughts together for this meeting tonight. That was Christine, Nancy, and I talking with Jeff. So Jeff, do you want to talk through, if you feel ready to do so, how you propose to do this work and not step by step, or at least big steps by big steps?
Yeah, macro step by macro step. I mean, my thinking that I reviewed with you folks the other day and with Joel prior to that was that basically you would be having an open space residential design bylaw, which is what Randall does, infused with aspects of natural resource protection zoning, which are what Joel and I do, kind of in an amalgam that works for Stockbridge, and that bylaw would pertain to a good deal of the town, the outer areas of town, the undeveloped areas. It would deal with residential development, subdivisions, things like that, as most of these bylaws do where they are passed in Massachusetts. And these bylaws create large areas of open space, compact areas of development, enhanced design flexibility and savings on infrastructure. So they're attractive not only in terms of their results for the town, but they're attractive to developers as well. In your case, you have these cottage era estates, these large estates that you're concerned about in town, such as the 37 Interlaken, which I've seen plans for by the developer. So try to build in aspects so that if the property is one of these large estates, and the proposal is to develop the estate to some degree, that can fit within the model. And there may be bonuses for additional density, bonuses for other than residential uses that would have to be earned, possibly more units, possibly more uses. And that we have to discuss and figure out how generous or not so generous those bonuses should be, according to what folks think might work in Stockbridge. So that's kind of the overall approach, is to have a general OSRD type bylaw that will pretty much cover the town, but also have it be adaptable to these estates if they are the parcels to be developed.
And Jeff, just on that point, you don't think we need a separate great estates or cottage era estates bylaw? That those issues, as you described, could be incorporated in one single open space residential design bylaw.
I hope we don't need a separate one. Joel didn't think that we did when I talked to him. He thought there could be provisions built into the OSRD that would accommodate these if they were proposed to be developed. And I mean, the major difference is that that these types of bylaws, OSRD and NRPZ, they usually pertain to large areas of land that are proposed for residential subdivisions, large acre, large house lots, lots of streets, dividing up the land into a large subdivision. That's what they normally address. But here you have a special case where you have these places where a large residential subdivision may not be proposed. It might be something that looks more like this proposal, which you wouldn't ordinarily see in a town. So you'd want the bylaw to be adaptable enough to potentially be applicable to this type of development, which could have other than residential uses. It could have resort type uses. It could have a restaurant use. It could have condominiums. It could have other things that would fit into a to a project like this contemplated. So short answer is no. I don't think you need two separate bylaws. I think you can do it in one.
Okay, good. Does anyone have questions for Jeff at this stage? Having given us kind of the broad overview, please speak up.
Jeff, I was wondering if you can explain how the 50% or more open space works. And I think people need to understand how you are able to make the open space during in your plan, so that there is land that first off is determined to be the good land, and then you reduce the density. I think you can explain it better than I can as to how you come up with the open space and still allow these proposals to be density neutral. Did you understand that?
Sort of. In a nutshell, a normal development would simply run as much roadway throughout a piece of land as possible to create new road frontage, to create new house lots. So the more road you can run hither and yon, the more frontage you create and the more lots you get. And that's the standard way that residential subdivision is done in Massachusetts. These approaches are more area based. It's not based on how much road that can be created, but the area of the parcel. And there's often a formula applied to the parcel to determine the number of units. So instead of creating roads to create houses, you evaluate the area, and that's how you determine the number of units. And then there are requirements for open space. It's not necessarily arbitrary. Generally, they're set out in the bylaws. The ones I write are usually 65 to 80% of the overall parcel. Wrote one in the Adirondacks for 90%. And the area that remains may be developed with the allowable units going in that area. The kind of artful part of it is determining where the development will go versus what's going to remain open and preserved. Randall has a 4-step method that he uses, and we'll certainly take a look at that and see if that's appropriate. I believe Joel tried to incorporate that in his draft. I do it with a conservation analysis and findings process that's written up in the bylaw. And it's a process whereby the developer conducts a conservation analysis of the property, and they have to look at that whole property and what's out there, what are the natural resources, where are they at, and then submit that to the planning board for their evaluation. And then the planning board makes a finding, conservation finding. And that finding can either agree with the developer's analysis or it can modify that analysis. Basically, you want to preserve the best and the most unique of the natural resources on the property, to the best views, the best habitat, the best forest land, the best farmland, whatever happens to be out there, and locate the developed areas on the least important areas of the parcel. So that's kind of the way it works. And if there's discretion in here, that's usually where it is. And there may be some rub between the developer and the board, but ultimately the board needs to have the approval ability on where the development goes and where the conservation goes.
Jeff, what about, somebody has said to me, how can it be fair that an owner of a piece of property under this bylaw is legally restricted from building anything on 75% of his land? What's fair about that to the owner or the developer?
Well, the question would be, what's fair about any zoning? What's fair about 4-acre zoning versus 2-acre zoning versus 1-acre zoning? I mean, zoning is, can be generous in some cases, and it can be fairly restrictive in other cases, depending on the town, the location. I mean, much of the zoning that I do would not work in the immediate Boston metro area and would probably be overturned as arbitrary and unreasonable. Stockbridge, way out in the Berkshires, is an entirely different matter. The other aspect of it is, even though you're preserving quite a bit of land, you are getting benefits in the developable area. That's you're being able to concentrate development there. You have design flexibility. You're saving greatly on infrastructure. The permitting is prompt and predictable. There are waivers built in. I can say that as restrictive as some of these zoning models appear, I've had very good success passing them in towns. In fact, most of these bylaws end up passing with landowner support, with 90% of the votes at town meeting being favorable. At least that's my experience so far. At first, there might be pushback because it looks restrictive, but once people understand it, although there are probably less units available, there are so many other benefits that they end up supporting it. My experience.
Okay, thanks. Anybody else have questions on the board?
Yeah,
I have
I
a
have a question.
Go ahead, Kate.
Wayne, you can go ahead if you want.
Jeff, Wayne Slazik, thank you for joining us.
Hi, Wayne.
My question is, as you calculate the preserved property or the preserved area, do you take the initial acreage and take the percentage out of that, be it usable, buildable land or wetlands and what have you, the whole thing? Or do you first take the wetlands and steep slopes out of it and then calculate your percentage?
Generally, the preservation requirement is stated up front. And in most of these that I write, it's 80%. Where the constrained lands come in the formula, if you decide to use a formula, the constrained lands get subtracted from the entire parcel. So you start with the entire parcel and you take out 50% or 100% of the wetlands, all or a portion of the slopes over a certain percentage, water bodies, easements, areas that are already developed, things like that. And you take all that out and then you divide by whatever density divisor you have. And that's what gets you the number of units that are possible. So that's really where those constrained lands show up, is in reducing the number of units that are possible. So the open space percentage stays the same. It can actually increase. It can't decrease. It can increase. And the constrained lands on a highly constrained piece of land can only reduce units. The more constrained land you have, the less units you're going to end up building in the final analysis.
Okay, thank you.
Kate,
Yeah, so Kate Fletcher here. Welcome, Jeff.
Hi there.
I chair the zoning review committee, so I put a fair amount of time and work into this effort to start. So I guess one question I have is, how will you ensure that the participation of all planning board members, and then will you be interested in input from the Stockbridge Land Trust as well as Berkshire Natural Resources Council?
I am going to have to defer a bit on that question. I will be happy to get input from anyone who wishes it, but it probably needs to be organized through the 3-member subcommittee, which is, I believe, Christine and Bill and Nancy. I want to stay away from trying to work with too many independent people, having too many ex parte conversations. And I'm really going to look to the organizing group of the subcommittee of the planning board to make sure that they get the proper input into the process. And of course, when there are public meetings or hearings, everyone will be free to speak, and I and they will be able to hear all of that. But I don't think that there is frankly, you don't really have the budget for an extensive public outreach process now, I don't believe. Unless it's largely organized by you folks. And if it is, I can certainly attend any of that, but I don't believe I have the budget to organize such an outreach effort.
Kate, you ask a good question about the involvement of the full planning board. We did talk about this actually a couple of times with Jeff, including yesterday, and he just said that he needs to deal with a small group of people, and I think as a practical matter, that makes sense to me. I think if I were in his shoes, I'd want the same thing. I think it's incumbent on Christine and me and Nancy to share his work as it progresses. Now, obviously, we have to observe open meeting laws, and we're not going to revert, I don't think, to weekly meetings. I suppose we could call extra meetings if we feel the need. But I would commit as a member of that working group and as chairman of the planning board to sharing his work as soon as we see it. So when he produces a new draft of a bylaw, it's not going to be the 3 of us working over it for several hours, sending it back to Jeff, having him fix it, and then presenting it to you. I think we need to send it out, such a draft, to the full board as soon as it's received for comments. Now, how we do those comments without violating open meeting laws is, I guess we have to figure that out. Maybe we do have to have a few extra meetings, open meetings, scheduled public meetings, that where the only item on the agenda is this document and the ideas behind it. If that's what it takes, then maybe that's what we will need to do.
Yeah, I do think that the transparency is important here. And you've got a 3-member ad hoc committee, and my memory was that it was formed to do a press release for Randall's presentation now. So you may want to consider, along the lines of what I mentioned at the last meeting, maybe changing the makeup of that ad hoc committee to include, a different opinion potentially. I'm not saying that the three of you have the same opinion, but you might want to think about the makeup of that ad hoc committee so that it potentially you are going to pull, that it's constructed such that you are going to pull more people along with you.
Okay, thank you for that comment. Jeff, did I cut you off? Did you have anything further to say on that? One of the points Kate asked you was, is there a role for example, the Stockbridge Land Trust or the NRDC in this process? Do you want to comment on that?
I think that you can include as many groups and committees as you think are appropriate. The Conservation Commission, if you have an open space committee in town, Berkshire Regional Planning Commission, if they're interested. Yeah, Historic Commission. Yeah, in the case of these estates, I'm sure the Historic Commission is interested. But I think that's a local matter that you folks need to figure out, because you know the politics and you know the parties in interest in Stockbridge. My experience is that the more of a role that they play right from the beginning, and the more up to speed they're kept, the better will be the end result.
I have a couple of other questions. One is, so Randall, in his presentation, it was very good. It certainly was interesting. In some ways, I felt that he painted a very rosy picture of this concept. And, in watching it, it just occurred to me, there must be challenges, there must be difficulties. And I'm wondering, you don't have to address it right now, but I'm wondering if you could at some point explain, what those are. It's just hard for me to imagine that there aren't any challenges. And I know one of our town officials attended a webinar, I think it was sponsored by one of the state agencies on this approach. And he asked, about the potential for this type of approach to be exploited or co-opted. And the answer was that, yes, this is possible. So that's another question that I have for you.
Well, as I mentioned, way back in the 80s, I got my start with Randall. I worked for him and did a lot of OSRD type work, density neutral type work. And eventually, about halfway through my career, I became a little bit more interested in other approaches that weren't necessarily density neutral in rural settings. And that's why I developed, along with Joel Russell and Bob Ritchie, natural resource protection zoning. I think that model is more protective than OSRD. So it diverges. So Randall and I diverged a little bit. I have spoken with the 3-member committee about trying to introduce some NRPZ concepts into your model, and they're receptive to that. I mean, some of the points of departure, and the reason they depart is because I found them to be problems with OSRD is density neutrality. I generally, in a rural setting, don't favor density neutrality. I favor density negativity. I think that's more appropriate often.
Can you define that, Jeff? What's density negativity?
Less units than you'd otherwise get conventionally. So whereas OSRD relies on a yield plan that harkens back to the underlying zoning. So you create a kind of a fake subdivision plan showing how many units you could get under a conventional subdivision, and then you're locked into that. That's what you have by right. I steer clear of that. I like to do it by formula. I like to use a very conservative formula that takes away constrained land and then divides by what I call a density divisor that in most cases is 5 or greater. So think of that as 4 acres per unit. This is generally 5, and it's gone up to 7.5, 10 in some places. So getting away from the old zoning and having the NRPZ be its own zoning, and then getting away from the idea that that you need to create roads to service everything. That all the house lots, everything you develop has to have a large amounts of frontage on roads. I think the road building is kind of destructive, it's expensive, and it really doesn't, it's not necessary in all cases. So anyway, Kate, to answer your question, my model and Joel's model that we developed 15 years ago, the NRPZ, does diverge from Randall's model a bit. And what I've discussed with the subcommittee was trying to meld some of the best aspects of both for Stockbridge.
Thank you, Jeff. I appreciate your answer.
I hope it made sense to more than just me.
It did. Thank you.
Any other questions from members of the planning board? If there are none, does anyone from the public want to ask Jeff a question or have a comment on this topic? Patrick, please.
Question I have is this: will even if you treat the underlying density, the underlying zoning like R2, R4 as a maximum, I just heard your explanation of negativity. There nevertheless has to become some constraint. And will the underlying zoning be written in the law so that a subsequent future planning board couldn't, for example, change R2 to R1 or R4 to R2, in effect taking your work and doubling the potential density?
Oh, I don't think I understand your question yet. Can you rephrase it just a little bit so I don't give you a goofy answer?
You have a 60-acre plot in R4, then under conventional subdivision, assuming there's no wetlands, you've got 15 acres that you could build, or 15 units you could build there. Well, but if we do this, is that maximum formula protected, or could a future board change in effect the underlying density and make R4 into, let's say, 2-acre zoning, which would in effect double the number of units that would be supported under your proposal?
Yes, a future planning board with town meeting approval could change the formulas that we do here, just as it could change the conventional zoning that you have in place now, the 2 and the 4. A future planning board could recommend that they become 1 and 2. And if a town meeting in the future approved that, then you'd have more density. Same thing here. Whatever numbers get put into the formulas that we use at some point in the future could be liberalized, or they could be made more conservative. I mean, zoning only lasts as long as town meeting says it should. When town meeting's ready to change it, it can.
But Jeff, once the land is developed, there's a conservation easement put on the property, right? So that they wouldn't be able to build on that land, even if the density did increase.
That's correct. The open space is preserved in perpetuity, preferably by a conservation restriction or another method. But that land is not something that a town meeting can come in and mess with.
Okay. Thanks, Patrick. Anybody else from the public with a comment or question for Jeff on this topic? If not, I want to thank you, Jeff, for joining us tonight. We look forward to working with you, and I think we'll see a lot more of you in the weeks and several months ahead.
Okay, well, it was good meeting all you folks, and I'm sure I'll see you again soon.
Thank you.
Jeff.
Thank you, Jeff.
Take care. Good night.
Good night. Okay, I see Phil has joined us. Welcome, Phil.
Hi, Phil.
We jumped the agenda a little bit, Phil, to have Jeff Lacey come on before you. So this item is your item, continuing the hearings on amendments to the parking and sign bylaws. And do I have to declare that we're continuing those hearings? Do we need a vote? I don't think so, do we?
No, I think the fact that you've said it is good, Bill.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Phil has distributed both clean and redlined versions of these bylaws. I'd like you to take us through line by line, every one of them. I'm just joking, just joking. A good way to cause people to leave the meeting. Maybe you could hit, Phil, the high points on first the sign bylaw. What is it that you think we should be focusing on within this bylaw?
Sure. Well, first, the reason I gave you 2 copies is just because the marked up one tends to be kind of difficult to read with all those edits in there. So I thought, for some people, it's easier just to see a clean copy, just to see if anything jumps out at them that might be a cause for concern or question.
Yeah, thank you.
But then, of course, the marked up one shows what I've done to the existing bylaw. So I'm just scrolling down to it now. So for the sign bylaw, a lot of the changes were, small things to language, just to make it a little bit more concise, a little bit clearer. As discussed in the last meeting, the planning board wanted to be the authority on signs going forward. So that was just changing that from the sections where it said select board, now it says planning board. So another pretty straightforward change. What's this other one? But the major changes were to the section regarding signs in the business zoning district.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but are you going to share the document so the public can see it too?
It should have already been circulated. I sent it out, it was yesterday, I believe, to.
Right, but for people viewing the meeting.
Can you share the document on the screen?
For you? I can pull it up if you want.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to share your screen, I'm working on 2 different machines here, so I don't have it on the other one. Yeah, there we go.
Thanks, Kate.
Are we on signs or, yeah?
Doing signs, yes.
6.8.8, I think.
Yes, that was the bulk of the changes.
Actually, I'm going to go down to the, here we go.
Okay. So the major change was that to section 6.8.84, and that's saying that, well, the proposed amendment would allow a building with a single establishment, which also has significant architectural features, to exceed the limit of 3 total signs. However, it would still have to conform to 6.8.81, which would limit the total square footage. So there was a suggested note that I had that said to also incorporate area into that exemption, but I thought that, you know, depending on the architectural feature, to have no sort of regulation on the area, you know, you could have a gigantic sign and technically it would still conform to this bylaw, depending or for the proposed amendments. So all I did was take out that area portion, and this would just allow somebody to have an additional sign depending on the architecture, but they would still have to be, it would be 30 square feet or less.
And where does it say,
Phil, oh, sorry.
where's the 30 square feet point, Phil?
30 square feet should be 6.8.81. Scrolling up to it. Yeah, so that's the, where is it? It's the first subsection under 6.8.8.
So Phil, just,
I think you just passed it. Yep.
where is it?
6.8.81.
Am I there?
Right there, top of the page. Yep.
Okay, so just so I understand that, instead of, so now, whereas before it was, if somebody wanted to have a sign that wasn't part of the wall, they would need to give up a wall sign. Now they can have a total of 3 wall signs not to exceed 30 square feet plus a separate signpost.
Depending on the architectural features. So it's not saying that, you know, any building in the business zoning district can, you know, exceed that 3 sign limit. That was the provision that we had talked about, depending on, you know, if they have some archway or columns or something that would be conducive to hanging a sign. So this would just give, you know, it'd be a pretty specific building that we're talking about, but it would give them a little bit more leniency to that 3 sign requirement, or
Okay.
3 sign maximum.
I guess I need to look at it more. I just got this morning and I didn't really have a chance to look at all these, the redlining too closely, but I'll look at it more carefully.
Okay. Yeah, and again, my notes are in the margin there, so I mean, hopefully that'll provide some clarity when you review it.
Yeah, they help. Thank you.
But that was the bulk of it. And then, you know, there's some portions at the very end that I edited, but that's not changing any sort of regulation. That's just language to make it more consistent. You have a couple subsections that essentially said the exact same thing, but in 3 different ways. So I just made them consistent.
So in the portion I'm showing right now, 6.8.6A, you've got in green highlight without, was that, I wasn't sure based on.
That's just to myself. These things can be hard to digest. So as I'm going through them, I highlight portions just so
I see
things stand out at me.
I see that doesn't represent a change.
No, I didn't change anything there.
And then there was a question I had, I'm going to scroll up there to the purpose. I noticed that you changed the introduction. And I was wondering, I didn't see any comment attached to that. So I was wondering what that change was based on. Was that based on input from?
This should have been based on input. And again, it was just, it doesn't really say anything differently. It's just a little bit more clear. The purpose of this introduction is essentially saying all new signs or alterations to existing signs should seek to complement and enhance the community character. I mean, that's the whole point of this bylaw. So I wanted that to stand out. And it mentions the surrounding landscape and things like that. So
Okay, I have some input there. I would prefer to leave the adjectives benefiting from the openness and beauty of the surrounding natural landscape, as well as the village center and the part you have crossed out, the village center and surrounding lands create a visually rich and satisfying community character that all new signs should seek to complement and enhance. To me, you know, by taking that out and going to all new signs or alterations to existing signs should seek to complement and enhance the community character, that's a bit more generic. And I think I prefer the original wording there.
Okay.
I understand that I'm guessing that you want to be very clear and to the point and just sort of cut and dried. But I feel that those adjectives actually add something and are important.
Yeah, I mean, and that's up to the planning board. So whatever you all think. The reason I took that stuff out is, to me, a lot of that language sounded opinionated. And like you said, Kate, typically the language in these is just pretty cut and dry and unfortunately boring. But yeah, it's up to the planning board.
Yeah.
You know, it's easy enough to leave it as is.
I don't have a problem with leaving it in. I would point out, and I don't mean to pick nits, Phil, but I think in this case, the word complement needs another E and no I.
Yes, you're right.
That's something a spell check won't catch. Sorry. I promise to refrain from nitpicking from here on.
No, we have to nitpick. That's what you have to do with bylaws, unfortunately.
Yeah. Somebody would have caught that eventually. I just pass it on.
The writing matters.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does.
Do you want to highlight anything else on the sign bylaw, Phil?
No, I mean, the feedback that I got from the planning board was, you know, that the focus was supposed to be in the business district and to try to give some flexibility to, you know, some establishments that may have odd buildings. And I think I tried to, you know, give them a little bit more leeway without, you know, rewriting an entire bylaw to provide for just a, you know, a couple of places.
Yep.
So.
Good. Speaking of signs, I can't see whether Patrick is still on. He is. Patrick has pointed out that emergency services, police and fire in this town have in the past had trouble identifying certain properties, many properties that aren't properly identified with a street number. And the ideal would be for everybody to have a visible street number on their property, either right at the edge of the road or I think within 50 feet, so that, you know, normally somebody would be able to see it readily. I know this is outside the scope of this bylaw, but I just mention it as an issue that I guess Patrick and the select board have looked at, and I don't think it's a planning board issue per se, but it does have to do with signs. So I just remind us. And Patrick, do you want to say anything about that?
Donna's marked up the draft that that the fire chief requested, and so we have basically a draft that I was going to present to my colleagues sometime in the next meeting or two. I'd be happy to share with Phil if he wants to take half an hour of his allotted time and review it. I don't know. That's really up to you guys. I don't have any problem with that.
My only comment, Patrick, was, wouldn't it be nice if the Laurel Hill Association, which has done such a fantastic job with signs on parks and trails, could design a sign that most of us would actually be willing to use instead of some of those remarkably ugly signs that you see in other towns.
I helped design the Laurel Hill signs, and I've actually already designed a proposed sign for us that I didn't want to include with the proposal because I really think that, you know, more input from everybody should go into it. But to your point, I completely agree. There's no way we're putting those ugly signs up around town.
Yeah, good. Okay. Sorry, I couldn't resist when we talked about signs. It reminded me of.
I just have a quick question, actually, for Patrick. The draft that you said that was marked up, was that from the zoning bylaws or were those general bylaws?
I believe it's a general bylaw for housing. for, emergency services kind of thing, and there's literally over 100 of them if you do a Google search in Massachusetts. And we just basically cobbled together the points we liked from 5 or 10 other towns and turned it into one that then the lawyers cleaned up and rewrote for us.
Okay, okay, thank you.
So just to provide a slightly different opinion on the street numbers, I would suggest that allowing people to do what they want. I think it seems to me like having every single property with the exact same number is maybe not that interesting.
No, there's no obligation to use the pre-designed one. It's just less expensive. So what many municipalities do is they make the pre-designed signs available at a very low price point, so that for folks who can't afford to spend a few $100s to put up a special post at the beginning of their 200-foot driveway, they can basically, for 20 or 30 bucks or whatever, get one from the town, that we contract with a sign provider. But there would be no obligation to use that. It's just the size of the letters that is the size of the numbers is the obligation.
That's great. Thanks, Patrick.
Got it.
I have a question about your numbering, Patrick, and it relates to our A&R proposals. And I'm not for sure if somebody submits an A&R and it's going to be a building lot, if they should have to number that lot and when that should occur. And I don't know if you're talking with the fire chief, if he has any opinions about that, and if that needs to be something that the planning board has in their A&R review or not. But it's something to consider.
Okay. I think generally you're talking to a first gear here. I only understood half of what you said, but I think the solution is, why don't I take the marked up copy from Donna and send it to the planning board email address and invite people to weigh in. One thing I do know that it contains is that every fork in the road for for one driveway that accesses multiple units, down that driveway, there has to be a lot number sign that shows which house is which. The whole idea is to quickly be able to identify. So for example, if any of you have been at the 82 Interlaken property, way down that driveway where it forks, they would need to identify which is 82 and which is 80, or whatever the number next to it is. But it's pretty straightforward. But I was just responding to what the fire chief had requested for public safety.
Okay, thank you, Patrick. Phil, do you want to move on to parking?
Sure.
We have a question, Bill, before you move on.
Oh, yeah, please.
Roxanne's original sign bylaw move the permitting from the permitting authority from the select board to the planning board?
This draft does that.
No, but did Roxanne's do that? Does anyone remember?
No,
I don't think it did. Yeah, I think you're right, Gary.
It did not.
Look, I have no problem with you guys doing it personally, but I think it would be really nice if my colleagues didn't hear about that sort of proposal from a tape, and rather I would call Chuck and you call Roxanne and you explain, why you think that's the way it should be. And just as a courtesy, I just think that would be both smart and,
I agree with you, Patrick. I think it would be nice. Roxanne seems to be interested in details, so I think it would, if she wants to have a hand in signs, I would be all for it.
I agree.
I questioned Philip on where the selectmen's language came in there, and he said it was decided at the planning board meeting. So I was unaware of that, because I agree that we do not want to just go and usurp the select board's
what I chose
without being able to hear from them what their concerns are.
I will call Roxanne.
And Chuck.
I'll call Roxanne and Chuck. Do you need a phone call, Patrick?
I do not. I am totally okay with whatever you decide.
Okay. I will call them both. Good. Phil, do you want to talk about parking,
Yes.
please?
All right. So just like the signs, a lot of these changes were just making things a little bit more consistent, language more concise. I've added some subsection headings just because your other bylaws have those, and for some reason this didn't. So there's some basic things like that. But then the major changes were removing.
Bill, sorry, before you start, can you just provide me with a little bit of context on the input you received before you embarked on working on the parking?
I believe the notes on the off-street parking requirements came from a member of the select board. I don't have it in front of me, so I don't have the name. But there were.
I think that was Roxanne, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so I just had some basic notes, and generally I'll just incorporate those into the existing bylaw and then go from there based on my own research and things that are jumping out at me. So that's usually the method that I take with these types of things, and that's what I've done here. So I think this was actually suggested by her. So removing 6.2.1 C, mainly just because I think it's contradictory to some of these other subsections, but the main reason that I suggested removing it, yeah, that's that strike through for business district, is all of these other subsections are based on use, not by district. That's the only one. So it's very inconsistent. It seems like it was just kind of stuck in there. And again, to say 1 parking space per 500 square feet of gross floor area, when all the other ones tend to have a ratio of a parking space to number of people, you know, it jumped out at me. It seemed inconsistent. So I suggested just removing that. And then the feedback that I got was the focus of these bylaw amendments were supposed to be on eating establishments. So that's really where I was paying attention to this. And it seemed that that the requirements were too strict. And once I looked into it, I found that to absolutely be the case. Most other places that I've looked into, other municipalities within Berkshire County, generally they're just going to have a ratio of a parking space to a number of seats. There were very few that I found that have additional requirements on top of that, such as, you know, a ratio of parking space to seats, but then also parking space to employees. And the only cases where I did find that were much larger municipalities. So it seems like in Stockbridge, this was strict to begin with, but especially considering, you know, the populace of Stockbridge, that it was particularly strict. So we were trying to give a little bit more leeway again, also for the purposes of smaller businesses to incentivize some small business growth in town. So, so the quick fix was, I think that we should just take out the provision about additional parking spaces for employees. As I said, a lot of towns, they just have, it's almost identical to what you already have here. It's 1 parking space, 3 seats. And that was seen time and again as I researched it. So I figured we should probably keep that. Initially, I wanted to go off of something a little bit more permanent that doesn't change. So I was thinking about building occupancy. But then the more and more I researched it, I didn't find a single municipality that does it that way. So I figured there was probably a reason for that and better not reinvent the wheel. So I stuck with the simple ratio, removing the provision for employees. And then I added this cutoff that I'll need the planning board's help with. So there's essentially a cutoff for off-street parking spaces not being required for an eating establishment of a certain size. So if it's small enough, essentially it wouldn't require an off-street parking space. But I left that part as just the 2 X's that you can see, because that number should probably be dictated by an authority within town, you know, whether that's a building inspector or a health department, but you know, as a planner, it's likely beyond, you know, the authority that I have to create that number for your town.
Did we talk about not having to have the downtown eating places, not having any parking requirements at all? Am I on?
Yeah.
I mean, didn't we say, how is Teresa's or the coffee shop going to have parking places? They are on Main Street. There's no, didn't we talk about them not having parking restrictions?
Yes, we did. And
Yes.
How can they have
That-
parking? There's no parking.
And I think we also talked about the Elm Street Market,
Yeah.
and that became a problem when I was talking to Phil about this, because if you figure it on square footage, the Elm Street Market really doesn't have many tables, but are they big enough so that they need to have a parking space or two? And if they do, where do they put those? So then it gets to be sort of confusing.
I thought we said the downtown restaurants, you know, did not have any parking restrictions because there is no possible way they can have parking. There is no parking places. You know, they can't sanction off the spaces in front of their shop. That doesn't make sense. I mean, where can they go? I thought we said they didn't have to have any parking restrictions on the main, you know, Elm Street and Main Street. If it was an eating establishment out in the country, yeah. But I thought we said no parking restrictions on downtown merchants.
We became confused then if we say none, would the Red Lion Inn and Michael's then be able to take their parking lots and change the use? So I think that was where we were having some issues trying to determine who gets to have limited parking and who gets to have none.
How can we follow this? How can we follow this bylaw? There is no way Teresa's or, you know, Main Street Cafe and the Muse and Elm Street, we can't enforce this law because they can't have parking spaces. There is no parking spaces. So we can't enforce this. It doesn't make sense.
I think what Christine's saying though is that you're gonna end up with unintended consequences, and like you could conceivably have Michael's like Christine said, close their parking lot and turn it into a huge patio.
Is there any way
But that's their property.
that we could word this so that it works? I mean, we can't put a bylaw in that's not possible, and yet we need to think about those other spaces. Is there any way we can word this so that it works?
I think that's the challenge, but I didn't catch who made the comment, but you know, if the unintended consequence is that some of these larger establishments, which already have, you know, more than adequate parking, you know, if we change the bylaw, then, you know, it's their property, so they can change it to a different use. So I think that's going to be the challenging part. That might be an inevitability. You know, we can't have it overly restrictive if there, as you said, if there isn't parking available, you can't require it. But then, you know, you can't single out two businesses and say, you know, you're big enough and you have to have it.
Could they apply to us if their establishment has no way to get parking? Could they somehow apply to us for a dispensation or something? You know,
I suppose, yeah, there could be a variance, and we might even be able to write something.
Then they have to have a parking lot?
Yeah, there might be a way to write the language that, you know, just off the top of my head, if you're within the business zoning district and parking is a physical impossibility, then you can simply apply for a variance, and then you would not have to follow this parking.
Yeah,
off-street parking requirements.
I mean, I feel uncomfortable putting in a bylaw that's not possible to enforce and doesn't make sense. Part of the reason Roxanne wanted to change the parking was for these businesses that have no parking spaces. And that was kind of one of her intentions, I believe, when she suggested this. So that would be great if you could somehow make it work for both kinds of restaurants.
That was the idea with trying to have this cutoff, and that's why I wanted to speak with the board about it to decide, if is that something that is realistic? Can we come up with a number? As it's written now or suggested, it would be based off of licensed occupancy. So say, the cutoff is, I don't know, 20 people, 30 people. How do we come up with that number? But I feel like there would have to be a line like that to still have the larger places be required to have parking, but it's going to be tough to come up with that number. And then even so, I think I even have it in the comments, then eventually when this does go to the public, then inevitably the larger businesses are going to push back because they're going to feel like the smaller ones are, getting away with something that they're forced to do.
Yeah.
The problem with a variance is that for those small restaurants, it's expensive because they have to go through the process and then show that they can meet the conditions for variance. So maybe it should be a special permit rather than a variance, which is less expensive, but
Not much.
What about a
right.
dispensation?
There's all the notification and everything that is required. So that's something to consider also.
Jennifer, question for you. How much is a variance?
I think it's close to 500, just like a special permit for the selectmen is close to 500.
Is there such a thing as a dispensation that you could just give it to them like an A&R?
No, I mean, we only charge 300. The planning board only charges 300, but we're not making any money. A lot of times we lose money on the special permits.
Yeah, can we just do something that says if you have a place on Main Street and there is no parking, that's all right. I mean, what can you do?
Well, the thing is that Michael's own and the Red Line Inn, they own their property. They can do whatever they want with it right now. It doesn't, you can't say, well, you can't build there because you can't change your parking lot. They can do what they want. So to me, what we talked about before, where there is, no restriction on parking in the business district, made more sense than anything.
Yeah. Yeah, we don't say they have to have parking.
Bill, you're on mute.
Sorry. I was suggesting that maybe we retain that last sentence of 6.2.1F, beginning off-street parking spaces shall not be required for any eating establishment with occupancy not exceeding X. And we make it a low number, 20. I mean, that would cover the Main Street Cafe, it would cover Elm Street, it would cover Once Upon a Table. I'm trying to think of the other restaurants, the eating establishments that don't have off-street parking. Those are the three that.
Coffee shop.
The coffee shop. Yeah, they certainly don't have 20, a licensed occupancy of 20.
The Lost Lamb.
Yeah, same, they wouldn't have 20, 20 spaces, at least indoors. They'd have less than 10 indoors. So, we make it some reasonable but realistic number like 20. And that addresses Marie's point about, we don't want a bylaw that can't be enforced because we can't require these places to have parking that simply don't have parking.
Think that's a good idea, Bill. I think one of Roxanne's points when she was doing this was Main Street Cafe. If they wanted to expand into their other section,
Right.
where they serve the ice cream cones, if they wanted to put tables in there because they're restricted now by something. But I think her problem was that she was feeling that they needed to be able to expand. So we have to think of that number kind of carefully, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't know how many she thinks she wants to serve there, but we might want to think about that number. But I
Yeah.
think that's a good idea.
I mean, so maybe it's 30, it's not 20. It clearly, Michael's and the Red Lion Inn would be covered otherwise. Those are the two biggies, and we figure out a number that's somewhere like 20 or 30. I agree, we have to recognize the possibility of the Main Street Cafe putting tables in that other space. Wouldn't it be nice if they felt there was a demand for tables in that other space all the time?
We do.
They wanted to. They were.
Well, I mean, wouldn't it be nice if COVID were gone and we could all
Oh yeah,
sit
exactly.
in that space without social distancing?
Right.
Do we know who gives occupancy permits? I know there's signs in the many businesses that says total occupancy, how many people. But I think if we had that information, and then we could maybe talk to Teresa or make a determination as to how many additional occupants would be necessary for that space, we would have something solid to go on rather than just looking for a number that seems to work.
Yeah.
That's what I was suggesting before, that it would have to be, there would have to be some input from an authority in town. My assumption is that the legal occupancy is likely a lot higher than the numbers that we're making up. Whoever decides that, whether it might be Board of Health, it might be a building inspector, we should be able to pull those numbers. If anything, it might be public record. I'm pretty sure it has to be posted somewhere within their establishment, but it'd be easier just to talk to somebody rather than, going into every single one and asking to see their sign. So.
Yeah. Does somebody want to talk to, I would start with Ned. Anybody want to talk to Ned about this and see if he knows who is the authority on these signs?
I can follow up with Ned.
Okay.
That's fine.
You've talked with Ned?
Yes, I've spoken with him before about the driveway bylaw.
Oh, that's right. Right. Okay, good. Then, let us know what you find out.
Yeah, the other reason I liked having the idea of the cutoff is because it's not just for the businesses now, but it can sort of direct growth or lack thereof, if you want, in the future. So by having that number, you can keep businesses to a certain size, on Main Street.
Right.
So that was the other idea, that, if 10, 20, 30 years from now, if for some reason there's some flexibility in this bylaw and some huge place wants to come in, I would assume that a lot of people would not be okay with that. So I just thought that cutoff was pretty clear and would keep businesses small.
Yeah.
The other one that has a problem with parking would be the library. They have you have library here and they have one parking space. They have no way to do anything different with their parking.
Right.
Our library in downtown.
Right.
Not the museums, but the library.
Okay.
That might be a separate thing, because I'm looking at.
That's 2 lines down.
Yeah, so they're lumped together, so that's the issue right there. That
Right.
The museum and the library are treated the same way.
Right. Well, our library doesn't have any option of where they can have parking.
Mhm.
If it's a museum out of town, you know, the Norman Rockwell Museum has parking and all that. Museums are different. The library doesn't have any.
But wouldn't the library be grandfathered at this point?
Yeah, it's a pre-existing nonconformity.
Okay, that works.
Bill,
Yes,
since the town permitted marijuana shops, are you going to require any parking for any potential marijuana shops? Which I think would be a great idea.
um,
Because otherwise, you could conceivably have, you know, someone does an edibles business and there's no parking requirement. You know, I mean, it could be, I'm just saying.
I am happy to say I had nothing to do with the approval of a marijuana establishment in the middle of downtown. And having said that, I'm not sure I'm a good objective observer of what may or may not be necessary. I think it's insane to put one there. I mean, I think it's insane to put them on Main Street in Great Barrington, but they've done it. And, you know, if it had to go anywhere, it should have gone in the Stockbridge Industrial Park. I know that's got problems, and I don't want to get into all the ins and outs of the marijuana establishment, but short answer, Patrick, is I have not thought about it. I don't know whether anybody else on the board does.
Well, it's by special permit, so I don't know if that changes things.
I don't have it in front of me, but there's likely something in that bylaw that regulates parking. I would have to take a look at it, though.
I think there was. I mean, I was opposed to it too, but the town voted for this at town meeting. So that's how we got there. My sense was that people really were voting for the idea that someone who smoked a joint on their front porch wasn't going to get hit with a misdemeanor, but that's the direction that it took.
Yeah.
Well, the state also came in and said if your town voted to authorize marijuana, then you needed to allow it to be sold in your town. And that was the heavy hand of the state coming down and really putting the planning board in a pickle, because it's not something we really wanted, I don't think, or the planning board at the time wanted, but we've got the state telling us you voted that way, so now you have to deal with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, at the town meeting, everybody just was so excited about okaying the marijuana, and then again, unintended consequences happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly.
That's the case. Yeah. So not a very satisfactory answer, Patrick, but that's probably the best you'll get from us tonight. Anything else, Phil, on the parking bylaw?
I don't think so. I will touch base with Ned and give this another pass.
Okay.
But otherwise, if there was, you know, anything that jumped out at any of the members of the board, you know, you can let me know. This one seemed a little bit more straightforward. So it's just a matter of coming up with that number, I think.
Yeah. Good work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jill, for the
So-
next round, I know we had the December holidays and New Year's and everything, but if possible, can you send that in a little bit sooner so that I didn't really have a chance to review these before to this meeting. I just got it this morning.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the next pass of it inevitably is not going to take nearly as much time. There's a lot of the time that goes into this is just on the back end, like for me doing research, and so it's time consuming. But you know, the first draft is always the hardest. So the turnaround to give another pass to both of these won't take that long.
Great. And you also label the next round as draft 2?
Absolutely. Mhm.
Thank you.
Good
Can
point.
we- Should I make it, do we need to make a motion to move this to our next meeting?
Yes, I think such a motion should be entertained.
So I would make a motion that we
Continue
move to January the 19th, or continue
Yeah.
to the 19th, our review of parking and signs amendments.
Is there a second?
Second.
That's from Wayne, I think. Any further discussion? Jennifer, can you please call the roll? You're muted.
You're muted.
Okay. Nancy. Marie,
Aye.
Wayne,
Aye.
Gary,
Aye.
Bill,
Aye.
Kate, Christine.
Aye.
Okay.
Did
Thanks,
Kate
Phil.
say yes? Good.
Phil, thank you.
Thank you, Phil.
Thanks, Phil.
Um, I
No
guess-
problem. Take care. We'll see you next time.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda is a date for a possible meeting with the Conservation Commission to discuss issues of mutual concern. This was an idea I think that Sally came up with and
Yes,
or maybe you, Christine. I think
No.
it's a good one.
Ellie.
We look at these lake and pond overlay district matters, and where we start and they leave off is a puzzle to me. And I would hope there's a way to streamline how those kinds of requests and maybe others are addressed within the town. So does everybody agree we should try to have a meeting?
Sure.
Set the date.
It's a open public meeting, so I don't know, maybe we could, I think things are beginning to pile up on the 19th of January, Jennifer, so
We have one special permit on the 19th. And we're going to have 2, maybe 3 on February 2nd.
okay, so maybe we want to squeeze this into the 19th and invite the Conservation Commission to join us at our meeting, or maybe we join them at their meeting. I forget, when do they meet, Jennifer? Does anybody know when the Concom meets?
They
Every
meet
other-
the opposite Tuesday. We meet
Sorry,
third, they usually meet second and fourth.
okay. Does anybody have a preference for them coming to us or us coming to them?
No, I think we need to have an organized way of doing this, though. We need a plan if it's gonna be our meeting. I mean, I think we didn't, and not just, waste time. I think we need to have a way of doing it.
Well,
How we wanna discuss
maybe I should talk
with Sally,
with Sally, and maybe we could come up with some
an agenda of something.
possible agenda, and I could share it with you all. Is
Yeah,
that,
or just,
if I
you,
share,
I
if I
mean-
share a potential agenda, is that a violation of the open meeting law?
can't you just talk with Sally and see what we need to talk about? And then we'll talk about it? I mean, but just have a plan.
Yeah, no, I agree. We need,
I mean, I don't think we need to have anything formal except that.
okay,
Bring it to the meeting and we'll do what you say.
that would be nice. I like that idea, Marie.
Plan of how we're gonna talk about it.
Yeah,
We'll do it.
Besides jurisdictional issues, I'm wondering about enforcement, because we're going on all of these site visits and we see these elaborate plans. And we really don't have a mechanism for enforcement. And I don't know, but I know in towns that have conservation commissions and then they have an agent, the fees for the permits cover part of the agent's responsibilities for doing the inspections. And I'm wondering if some of these more complicated projects, if we should look at the ability for either the Conservation Commission or us to be able to have a person that can go out and review the issues like we had on Mackinac Shores. And it got very confusing about who had what authority. And I just thought maybe if there was an agreement that this was something we could look into, seeing if it's possible within state law.
Okay, that's a good item. If anybody has other ideas for an agenda for such a meeting, shoot them to me and I'll mention them to Sally. Okay. I'll follow up and let you all know about that meeting. We got an email from Jennifer last week about 3 site visits. I forget the addresses, but they're all Foresight properties, I think, right, Jennifer?
Yes. Yeah. 1 Grove Road, 19 Lakeview Drive, and 21 Lakeview Drive.
Yeah. Are these, one of these will be the special permit we look at on the 19th? Is that right?
No, on the 19th, we're going to hear the 82
Oh, that's
Interlaken Road from White Engineering.
right.
And I think you guys all went on a site visit already there.
We did. Yeah.
And I think I sent everybody plans. If you didn't get them, it was really hard to send because they were so big. So, you know, if you didn't get them, let me know. I can send them separately.
Okay. Then Jennifer, can you maybe, as you usually do, maybe suggest a few dates and we'll come back
Yeah.
as we always do immediately, right?
Right. Oh, yeah.
Telling you which dates work for us.
Okay.
Okay, thank
I
you.
will do that. Yeah.
Finally, very quickly, I'll call it under other business. You saw the email from Ned regarding 14 Pine Street. And as I mentioned, I had a very brief follow-up conversation with him today. I don't think he had seen my response to his email saying that I was going to share it with you all and we may come back to you with questions. First of all, he said that there is more, what's the term? I want to say shielding.
Screening.
Screening. He said there's more screening in place than was required under the special permit. He felt that was pretty clear, despite what the abutter claims. He said that the widening of the driveway was sort of a natural effect of, you know, cars and trucks and buses pulling in and out. He said that part of the property may actually be town land. And he said, it may make sense for the town to put something there. That's what he said, put something there. I don't know, maybe a big rock or something that nobody can drive over, a post, or I'm just speculating. He said, put something there. He didn't say we should do it, but he said, I think the town owns that part of the area that has been widened. Nancy, you mentioned that you had been by the property on a rainy day and it didn't look like the drainage was what was required under the special permit. Is that right? Are you still there, Nancy? Yes.
Yeah, I'd only been, Peter and Major's been walking by, you know, because we do a loop around when we walk through town. I mean, it wasn't a visit or anything. We were just walking by. And you can see where the water is just coming down the driveway and going into the road. And it's not going into the rain garden, which I was under the impression that's what the rain garden was for, was to catch all that runoff from the driveway.
Yeah. I'm guessing that Ned didn't see it on a rainy day, so wouldn't have noticed that. I doubt he checked it. I didn't ask him that. It's interesting that that the abutter, Lillian, did
Mhm.
not attend the last meeting when this topic was on the official agenda. And I'm beginning to wonder, does that mean she's dropping this or Jennifer is saying no, and that's no such luck.
I talked to her and she had computer problems that night. She was
Oh.
trying to get on and she couldn't get on, and that's why she wasn't on.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay.
she remains concerned, I can say that. And I do disagree on the screening because as I remember, the screening was a discussion. We have a definition for screening. It's pretty clear. And the discussion included the owners working on the screening with the abutters.
Yeah, well, all I can say is that Ned told me he believes the screening was in accordance with the special permit.
When did you speak with him?
Either Friday,
Today.
no, not Friday. I spoke with him today, but I also, I only spoke with him today. I got an email from him last week between Christmas and New Year's, I think. The
Well,
one I distributed to you all.
okay, so I had actually checked with Lillian today to see where she was at. And she says that she's had a conversation with Ned and she felt that things were going in the right direction. But, based on what she had told me, that was a different direction from what you seem to have heard from Ned. So
Yeah.
Jen has something to add.
Yes, Jennifer.
Well, when Ned talked to Lillian, the screening that she was going to get was a verbal agreement between her and the owner. And when you look at the big plan where it shows everything, there is no screening in that front section. But that discussion was a verbal agreement. And so because it was a verbal agreement, there isn't much that we can do about that.
So what's next? Do we leave
You
this?
can ask the town to put like a little bit of a curb there. What happened was they added another space of parking, which took away that curb that was there.
Oh, so they took the curb away?
Or
Yeah, the special permit shows the curb going away. If you look on that big,
Oh.
the big site plan.
Patrick,
Yeah.
I work at the Waldorf School, so I parked in that lot many times. One of the problems is as you're exiting that parking lot because of the grade and you're so much higher than the road, you cannot see the road from your car as you're exiting. So if you're gonna put a rock down there, make sure it's tall enough so that people don't hit it with their car because they can't see it when they're exiting the driveway. I've granted, I only have one good eye and I'm not a terrible driver, but I have many, many times gone over that curb because you can't tell where it is when you're exiting. There's no way to see the ground because the parking lot is so much higher.
Yeah.
okay, that's a good point. Well, it sounds to me like we should leave this with Ned. He's got a dialogue going, apparently, with Lillian. According, Kate, you say they're getting closer to agreement. I'm not sure. I can't say anything about the screening. Ned told me that he thought the screening was adequate and in compliance, but I didn't ask him, why did you believe that? And he may have misinterpreted what Lillian wanted or what Lillian expected. I don't know, but
I think that the screening, since the report should show that there was discussion of the screening and there is screening shown on the plan, it might not be as much as what was ultimately discussed, but it seems to me that we should have some leverage here and that and that we should support this resident in terms of her concerns.
Mhm. How do we do that? Do we leave this in Ned's?
Well, I would, yeah, let them continue to work on it, but I also think that the planning board should continue to monitor this situation.
Okay, I'm just making a note.
I mean, here we are, on the one hand, we're talking about not having an enforcement, but the building inspector is the enforcer, in terms of meeting with Concom. So, we should use that if we need to. We hope we don't, but sometimes we do.
Okay. And I'll ask about the rain gardens too. I'll mention that too.
I think,
to
yeah,
Ned.
thank you. I think Lillian will appreciate that.
Yeah, okay. Is there any other business?
Move to adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second,
Second,
Okay, Jennifer, I'm afraid you have to call the roll one more time.
Okay. Marie,
Aye.
Bill,
Aye.
Christine,
Aye.
Nancy,
Aye,
Gary,
Aye.
Kate,
aye, aye.
Wayne.
aye.
Thank you
Got
all.
him.
Thanks a lot, everybody. Happy New Year.